Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to part two of our history series that Colette has so kindly put together for us. I guess other people are watching the Olympics or whatever tonight, but I think that's why you record it so you can watch it later. So, Colette, anytime you're ready, and you and Mark will work together showing the photos and whatnot,
We
right?
will. We will.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thanks all of you for joining us tonight. And thanks, Rhonda and Adult Ed for inviting me to do this presentation.
Thank you.
Uh, and Mark, thanks for all your technical help. These slides are really gorgeous, and I know they're going to really enhance the presentation tonight. So I really appreciate your work. All the photos except for one of mine from Selma, Alabama, come from various websites that I've used during my research. Um, and I used online resources for my research, as well as some information I've learned over the years in my reading about the civil rights movement. Um, Most of you by now know that I'm a history buff, and so this really interests me. And so it was a joy to put this together. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Okay, Mark, if you'd put up photo number one of our outline. Okay. So I decided to do this presentation using what I consider the major civil rights campaigns in the movement, starting in Montgomery, Alabama, with the bus boycott in 1955 and 56, and then moving to Little Rock, Arkansas. The Freedom Rides happened in 1961, and they were taking place in various states in the Deep South. The Birmingham, Alabama campaign, and the March on Washington, Washington, D.C., the Freedom Summer, which took place in the Deep South, and the Selma to Montgomery, Alabama March in 1965. So first, I'll give you some background information about each one of these campaigns or events, and then talk about some of the Jewish people who were directly involved in the campaigns. I found that there's so much in these stories for Jewish people to be very proud about.
Thank you.
A little bit of background about the civil rights movement. The main goals of it from 1954 through 1965 were to end discrimination, segregation, and unequal treatment of Black Americans. Jews played a major role in the movement. They served as advocates, fundraisers, lawyers, organizers, lobbyists, teachers, and protesters. So, why were so many Jews dedicated to the movement, and why did Blacks welcome them as brothers? They had much in common. Oh,
Yeah, hold on. Having a little
okay.
technical difficulty.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we're back. So they had much in common. Both had suffered from discrimination and persecution, and the Ku Klux Klan was a threat to both groups. So there was empathy, and both groups stood to benefit from the removal of ethnic and racial barriers. Reform Jews, on average, were more involved than Orthodox Jews were. However, some Jews were reluctant to get involved. They feared anti Semitic backlash and violence. They feared losing their jobs and businesses. And some Jews simply didn't welcome segregation at all. Then there were some very, very early advocates back in the beginning of the 20th century. The National Association of Advancement for Colored People, NAACP, was founded in 1909 as a direct response to a deadly race riot that occurred in Springfield, Illinois in 1908. At a time when lynching was all too common and the KKK membership topped 10 million people, a committee of blacks and whites launched the organization to fight racism and advocate for the rights, equal rights and opportunities for everyone. Jewish founding members included Reform Rabbi Stephen Wise, Reform Rabbi Emil Hirsch, and Lillian Wald. So if we could have the photo, please, of Lillian Wald, number 2. Lillian Wald is probably best known for establishing the Henry Street settlement in 1893 in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. This organization helped poor immigrants receive medical care, counseling, and other social services. Her belief that all people, regardless of race or class, deserved equal treatment, and that motivated her to become a founding member of the NAACP. In 1964, attorney Jack Greenberg led the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. Along with Thurgood Marshall, he litigated and won the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education Supreme Court case against school segregation. The case overturned the separate but equal law. And Joel Spingarn was a professor of literature at Columbia University. His strong feelings about racial justice led him to join the NAACP soon after its founding. He held various leadership positions in the NAACP, including chairman of the board. In 1914, he established the Spingarn Medal, which is awarded usually once a year to an African American for outstanding achievement. Past recipients of this award include W.E. Du Bois, Jackie Robinson, Duke Ellington, Thurgood Marshall, Oprah Winfrey, and Kamala Harris. Okay. If we could have Mark the outline back of the different movements, the photo number 1, please. Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to mention that if any of you have a comment or a question, just please feel free to ask at any time or make the comment at any time, okay? So we're going down to Montgomery, Alabama for the bus boycott, 1955 to 56. Here are some of the rules of the city of Montgomery, Alabama that had established early in the 1950s regarding seating on public buses. See if you can follow all this, because I had a little hard time following it all to begin with. Whites could sit in the front 10 seats and blacks in the black 10 seats. If the bus was empty, blacks still had to sit in the back. There were 16 unreserved seats in the middle, but blacks could not sit next to whites there. If the front of the bus was full, blacks had to give up their seats to any white persons entering the bus. This meant that they had to stand up during the ride, no matter how long it was. Blacks had to pay at the front of the bus, but then enter through the door at the rear of the bus. In 1955, seamstress Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. She was tired of giving in. Her subsequent arrest was the catalyst for the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955-56. Earlier, 2 other Black women had been arrested for violating bus laws, but Rosa Parks was a longtime activist and a member of the NAACP, and so she was selected by Martin Luther King as the symbol for the cause. For 13 months, blacks boycotted the buses. They carpooled, rode bikes, and walked to and from work, no matter how far they had to go. Jewish communities in Montgomery and the South in general seemed to be caught between a rock and a hard place. How could they balance tikkun olam and the Jewish quest for social justice with life in the Jim Crow South? If they spoke out in favor of the bus boycott, would they be targeted by the white supremacists and the KKK? Would their lives be endangered? Would they be ostracized and lose their jobs or their businesses? Often Southern Jews chose to play it safe rather than support the civil rights movement. One person who dared to speak up was Orthodox Rabbi Seymour Atlas. Born in Mississippi, he was rabbi of several different Southern congregations during his career. While he was rabbi of Agudath Israel Synagogue in Montgomery, he met and became friends with Martin Luther King and eventually tutored him in Hebrew. When the Montgomery bus boycott began, Rabbi Atlas didn't rush immediately to support it, but eventually he did, and he paid a very high price for that. He delivered a sermon called Social Integration, which caused a furor in his congregation. Thereafter, the synagogue's board of trustees demanded that he get their approval for any sermon, speech, or article he would write. Rabbi Atlas refused to obey this rule and eventually resigned his job. After he left the synagogue refused to allow any new rabbi to discuss Blacks or the subject of segregation. According to Montgomery Jewish Federation in 1954, quote, the white community in the South is generally opposed to desegregation, and the Jewish community in the South is part of the white community in the South, end quote. We have photo number 3, please, of Stanley Levinson. Mark?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've thought about this before with the bus boycott. So I guess the white people probably would have been okay if black people didn't ride the bus. So it must have been that they couldn't afford to run the bus system without the money from the black people. Is that what the issue
Well,
was?
it was basically the Blacks who were using those buses. So it really did put a financial strain on the bus companies. Really did. But the Blacks had just had enough of all these arcane rules and regulations and just said, something has to change here. And so that's why we had the boycott.
So I wonder if there was ever any thought in just ending bus service. Were they private buses or city buses? Do you
City
know?
buses. There
They
were
were
city
city buses.
buses.
So did
Yeah.
they ever think of just stop not running them anymore?
Not that I've ever read, because there were some whites who used the buses and they needed to get
Uh-huh.
where they wanted to go as well. But since the majority had been Black riders, it really did affect them financially. And I think that was the whole point. We're going to hurt you in the pocketbook, and then maybe something can be done to fix this discrimination.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is this
Okay.
the slide you wanted? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Mark.
Is this the one you want?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, this is Stanley Levison. He was a New York Jewish lawyer who felt freer to support liberal causes. He raised funds for the Montgomery bus boycott and befriended Martin Luther King. Eventually, he became one of Martin Luther King's closest advisors. He wrote speeches for him, and he even did his tax returns. In 1956, he and 2 Black civil rights activists from New York, Ella Baker and Bayard Ruskin, formed an organization called In Friendship. Its purpose was to channel money back to Black civil rights activists in the South who were suffering financially for their association with the movement. This included the Montgomery bus boycotters. The FBI believed that Levison had close ties with the Communist Party. In 1962, Attorney General Robert Kennedy warned Martin Luther King that his friendship with Levison could tarnish his reputation, but King ignored the warning. Soon, Robert Kennedy had the FBI begin electronic surveillance of Levison and Martin Luther King. Levison voluntarily broke off his close association with Martin Luther King so that King's reputation and the movement would not be damaged because of him. He remained friends with Martin Luther King, but stepped out of the limelight. Okay. Any questions about the Montgomery bus boycott or any more comments? No? Okay, then Mark, if you'd put that number 1 outline back up again, that'd be great, please. Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Let's,
I had a question,
yes,
or more of a comment. You mentioned that the reform movement was more active in the Buscot or in civil rights in general than the Orthodox community.
right.
Is that possibly because the German immigrants were middle class, upper middle class, and the Eastern European ones were more along the lower middle class, peasant, perhaps?
That's a good point. I don't know. Yeah.
Crossed my mind.
There, as you'll see as we go on through this program, there were mixed feelings, not only in the South, but some in the North as well, about whether to become involved with this movement. So, I don't know. That was a good point, Helene.
Possibly class, education.
Could be.
I mean,
Okay.
in general, the reform movement emphasizes the books of the prophets, I think, more than
Okay.
some of the other Jewish movements. That's at least my impression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the conservative movement was fairly active, but they've almost devolved into a non-entity in our times now. They have their own problems of not being orthodox enough or not being reform enough.
So maybe the reform movement just by nature was more apt to be involved in social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Little Rock, Arkansas. Zip on over there. 1957, the Little Rock 9. So in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. Separate was not inherently equal. School districts had to desegregate. Arkansas segregationists and Governor Orville Faubus strongly resisted desegregation. In 1957, Faubus stationed the National Guard at Little Rock Central High School to prevent 9 Black teenagers, later referred to as the Little Rock Nine, from entering the school. In response, President Eisenhower sent federal troops to Little Rock to guard the students so they could enter the school. In 1958, Governor Faubus closed all 4 high schools in the city for an entire school year to prevent desegregation, and that shut out over 4,000 students. It wasn't until 1972 that the schools in the city were fully integrated. 1972. Unlike some of the Deep South cities, Little Rock's Jewish community was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. In 1958, a group of white women in the city formed what was called the Women's Emergency Committee to Open Our Schools, or the WEC. Many Jewish women became members of that group. When Little Rock 9 student Elizabeth Eckford was mobbed by the segregationists on her way home from Little Rock Central High, a Jewish man named Benjamin Fine gave her comfort, advice, and protection from the mob as she waited at the bus stop. Okay, Mark, if we could have photo 4 of Rabbi Ira Sanders. Thank you. Rabbi Iris Sanders of Little Rock's Reform congregation, B'nai Israel, played a large part in the city's civil rights movement. Before moving to Little Rock in 1926, he had held rabbinates in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and in New York City. Soon after arriving in Little Rock, he was introduced to Jim Crow personally. He made the mistake of taking a seat in the back of a city streetcar and was forced to move to a seat in the so-called white section. The episode became the inspiration for him to dedicate time and effort working for racial and social justice in Arkansas. He joined the NAACP. In 1957, he spoke at a public meeting of the state Senate, arguing against several pieces of anti-integration legislation being proposed at that time. He was booed, but he was also cheered, and he was asked to leave the building for his own safety. It was feared he might be assassinated. Rabbi Sanders also worked with the local Christian clergy to organize a day of prayer for reconciliation in Little Rock, since the city was suffering from so much turmoil. Sadly, as a direct result of the rabbi's activism, Temple B'nai Israel received several bomb threats in 1958. Rabbi Sanders believed that an effective rabbi, quote, sees his reward only in the changed attitudes and social activism in behalf of just and righteous causes, end quote. Okay, Mark, if we could have number 1 photo, the outline back up again. Is there any comments or are there any comments or questions about Little Rock? Okay. All right.
I was gonna say I remember sometimes you see something on TV and they show pictures of the white kids screaming at the black
Yes.
people, and the look of hatred on their faces is so awful. I mean, the boys and the girls. It's just
Yes.
terrible.
Both. Right. And so that gentleman, Benjamin Fine, that I mentioned, he was there when the mob surrounded her at the bus stop when she was trying to leave, and Elizabeth Eckford was trying to leave and go home. And, that was very brave of him to do. Okay, the Freedom Rides in 1961. In 1944, Irene Morgan, a Black woman from Baltimore, who had just suffered a miscarriage, traveled to Virginia to recuperate under her mother's care. After a short stay, she boarded a Greyhound bus headed home to Baltimore to attend a doctor's appointment. She dutifully took seat at the rear of the bus reserved for Blacks as mandated by Virginia's segregation laws. When the bus stopped to pick up more passengers, some whites got on. The driver told Morgan that she and the Black woman next to her had to give up their seats to the whites. She refused and was arrested for violating Virginia's segregation laws. Note that this was 11 years before Rosa Parks refused to relinquish her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Morgan didn't let the matter rest. She took her case to court, and it ended up at the Supreme Court in 1946 as Morgan versus Virginia. The court ruled that segregation on interstate buses was unconstitutional. In a separate Supreme Court case in 1960 called Boynton versus Virginia, the court ruled that segregation in interstate transportation facilities was unconstitutional. And what this meant, for example, is that there could be no more whites-only areas in interstate bus terminals. So no more whites-only restrooms, lunch areas, waiting areas, etc. The Freedom Rides of 1961 were designed to test these Supreme Court rulings. Black and white activists traveled together to deep South states on buses from northern cities. Out of a total of 60 freedom rides, it's estimated that about half of the 400 plus freedom riders were Jewish. They planned to eat together in bus terminal restaurants, use the restrooms, and sit together in the waiting areas. As a result, several Freedom Ride buses were firebombed, riders were stoned and beaten up, arrested, and imprisoned, and some were even incarcerated in the infamous maximum security Parchman prison in the Mississippi Delta. We could have marked photo number 5 of Judith Fries Wright. Thank you. Judith Fries Wright from Massachusetts rode a freedom bus to Jackson, Mississippi, where she was arrested and spent 6 months in Parchman prison. Just to give you a little idea of what Parchman might have been like, it was really considered one of the worst prisons in the South. It was a work farm, and the conditions were just really deplorable. So she spent 6 months in that prison. After release from prison, she returned home, but she later moved with her husband for a year to Meridian, Mississippi, in order to continue her civil rights work. She helped with voter registration, took part in sit-ins, and volunteered in freedom schools. And I'll talk a little bit more about freedom schools a little later. Her memoir entitled Acts of Resistance was published in 2019, and I looked it up on Amazon, and it is available in paperback form. In 1961, 4 rabbis and 14 black and white Protestant ministers took part in what was called the Interfaith Freedom Ride. Rabbis Walter Plout, Alan Levine, Israel Dresner, and Martin Friedman were from New York and New Jersey. We could have photo number 6 up, please, Mark. Okay. They boarded a bus in Washington, D.C., excuse me, and rode to Tallahassee, Florida. They met no resistance on the way because the places the buses stopped on the way down there were either already desegregated or they were not interstate terminals, and that made a difference. At the Tallahassee airport, 8 clergymen flew home, but the other 10, including Rabbis Friedman and Dresner, you can see Friedman here is in the front in the black coat, and Dresner is on the right beside him. They tried to integrate the segregated airport restaurant, but the restaurant had closed and locked its doors rather than allowing them entry. They stayed overnight in the city and tried again the next morning to enter the restaurant. Once again, they were denied entry. This time, they were arrested for unlawful assembly, fined $500, and sentenced to 60 days in jail. They were released from jail on bond 4 days later. The Tallahassee 10, as they were later called, this group of ministers and rabbis, appealed their sentences. Several years of legal wrangling ensued. Finally, in 1964, Rabbis Dresner and Friedman returned to Tallahassee and spent several days in jail rather than paying the $500 fine. Rabbi Dresner, the first rabbi arrested in the Freedom Rides, continued with his civil rights work. Having been arrested 4 times during the Freedom Rides, he became known as, quote, the most arrested rabbi in America, end quote. He was trusted by and worked very closely with Martin Luther King.
So I want to make sure I understand that. So when you said he spent 4 days in jail, is that because the courts ruled against them?
No, they were just wrangling about what they were going to do, and they had lots going on with their lawyers, and they got out after 4 days. They were able to fly home. Then they were still supposed to be responsible for the $500. And these two rabbis didn't want to do that. And so that's why they came back and
Oh, okay.
for
So they
time in
didn't
jail.
they didn't appeal that $500 fine.
But
So
well, I think they were doing that. They were in the process of doing that, but
ah,
they just decided, let's just go back and spend our time in jail instead of paying that. And I think it just came more down to the principle.
got it.
Yeah. Yeah, that the restaurant, by the way, was open before the 10 came to try to eat there, but they knew that they were on their way. And while they were on their way, they closed it and just everybody went home. And if we could have the photo number 1 of the outline back again, please. And just one more note about, excuse me, about the clergymen who went to Tallahassee. I think more or less they were really expecting and almost hoping to get some resistance along the way. But it just so happened that the buses stopped at places that had been desegregated already, or the bus stops weren't interstate bus stops. And so then, they didn't really get to do any protesting or anything like that. So they finally reached that uh, decision to do that in Tallahassee.
So if the bus stop is not an interstate bus stop,
Then
that
it was okay.
that means it's okay to be segregated at that period of time?
It was
Yeah.
because that wasn't part of the national law at that point. It just had to do with interstate bus terminals.
Oh.
Yeah.
Um, I'm Colette.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe these Jewish riders were in different buses, but as documentaries I saw on Freedom Ride, there was a lot of conflict. People were on these Freedom Rides were fed up by white persons in the South who didn't want them doing this, and
Yes.
eventually, the Kennedy administration had to like sent federal marshals or something to accompany these buses.
Absolutely. There were lots of buses that were burnt during the time and in different cities as it went on in 1961. That's very true. So for some reason or another, whatever the reason was, that these clergymen were on that particular bus, they didn't run into any trouble at all.
Oh, okay.
And the whole purpose was to go there and demonstrate at interstate bus terminals or any place that were not desegregated, that were interstate bus terminals. But as I said, they didn't happen to stop there. So that was a little confusing for me when I read that, because it's almost like they made the trip for nothing, but they didn't in the end. They were able to show what was going on at the airport in Tallahassee.
Oh, okay. So are you saying where the conflicts occurred, they were at non-interstate bus terminals rather than the
That's what I understand.
okay.
Okay, so we'll go to
I'm-
19. Yes.
Excuse me, I'm wondering how many interstate roads there were in the early 60s, late 50s. I know 95 wasn't finished until the 70s. I know the Pennsylvania Turnpike opened in the early 40s. I wonder how easy or how difficult it was to bypass the interstate bus stops, rest stops, whatever.
And it could have been because the buses necessarily didn't go by the fastest route. They may have gone by routes other than what we know as the interstates. And then they wouldn't have stopped at
Yeah.
interstate.
Yeah, especially if they were picking up or letting passengers
Exactly.
off.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's like today, if you take a bus going to New York, it may make some small stops like King of Prussia. Well, now it's a big stop, but historically it wasn't. And so yeah, so not all these are like big city stops that would,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And there's something that just got me wondering. I never read anything about this, but I'm just curious if somehow the bus that brought those clergymen just deliberately went to places that weren't interstate. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
It's
an
just
interesting question here.
it's just something that occurred to me, but I've never been able to find out.
I would suspect that the buses didn't go through, that they had to change. So maybe, when they got to, Virginia, they changed the bus, and then they just were on one bus in Virginia. So wherever it wasn't interstate anymore.
Mhm.
Just thinking that possibly.
Yeah.
In addition,
Okay. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, we'll go over to Alabama, to Birmingham, for the Birmingham Campaign, 1963. In 1963, Martin Luther King considered Birmingham the most segregated city in the US. Jim Crow laws required schools and public areas like parks to be segregated. Blacks had to use separate drinking fountains, restrooms, and elevators. They suffered discrimination in housing and job opportunities. Birmingham clothing stores didn't allow anyone to use their fitting rooms. They were Black. Blacks were not permitted to eat in white-owned restaurants. City buses were segregated. Most public libraries barred them from entry, let alone being able to borrow a book. Literacy tests and poll taxes kept many Blacks from voting. Black homes, businesses, and churches were bombed regularly. In fact, during this period of time, Birmingham's nickname was Bombingham. But Blacks were not the only ones affected by discrimination in Birmingham. Jews were harassed and threatened by the KKK and other white supremacist groups. For example, in 1958, Temple Beth El barely escaped total destruction. Swastikas were scrawled on its walls. 56 sticks of dynamite were placed outside the building, and their fuses were lit. And the only thing that saved the temple from complete destruction was that it started to rain and it burned out the fuses. In April of 1963, Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement targeted Birmingham in order to bring media attention to the city's discriminatory practices. Their main goals were to desegregate downtown businesses and to show the world the resistance, potentially violent, they knew would result from the sit-ins, boycotts, and mass marches. During the May 2nd Children's Crusade, in which over 1,000 children marched, police used fire hoses on the young protesters, and police dogs attacked young and old. Many people, including children, were arrested. Because so many people were arrested during the various protests, the jails became full and alternate detention sites had to be found. So many of those people who were arrested found themselves herded into city fairgrounds, fenced in there, and in open air stockades. On April 12th, Martin Luther King was arrested and jailed for defying a court injunction designed to stop the anti-desegregation protests. This injunction prohibited demonstrating, parading, or picketing without a permit, and the city of Birmingham refused to issue a permit. The Jews of Birmingham were in a difficult position vis-a-vis the movement and were divided about it. Some were actively engaged and as a result faced harassment and bomb threats because of their activism. Others feared what would happen to them and their livelihoods if they supported it. And many Jews were already working busily behind the scenes with the Birmingham officials to reduce tensions in the city. And some of the Jews were simply not interested in desegregation. We can have photo number 7 of Rabbi Milton Grafman, please, Mark. Thank you. Rabbi Milton Grafman was the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Birmingham. Like other Jews in the city, he was struggling with the question of how to juggle support for social justice with the realities of life as a Jew in the South. He and 8 white Christian clergymen in the city wrote an open letter published by local newspapers titled A Call for Unity. In it, they denounced the planned civil rights demonstrations as, quote, unwise and untimely, end quote. They stated that the pursuit of racial justice should be conducted in the courts and the laws presently on the books should be obeyed, implying Jim Crow or not. They asked Martin Luther King to wait and be patient. Things should move slowly, gradually. King should exercise patience. The city would deal with the issue in its own time and in its own way. And they encouraged the Birmingham Black community to avoid King's campaign. 4 days later, Martin Luther King responded from his jail cell to this letter with one of his own, now known as the Letter from a Birmingham Jail. In it, he rejected the idea that the pursuit of justice should move slowly. Now was it time for action. He wrote, quote, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, end quote. Meanwhile, adding to this complex situation, 19 conservative rabbis from northern states flew to the city to support Dr. King and the protests. They believed they could not be silent and stand by while Blacks are being mistreated in Birmingham. It was their duty as Jews to pursue social justice. But many of these northern rabbis' own congregations were against their trip to Birmingham. So the congregations there were divided. The Birmingham Jews hadn't asked for help from the northern rabbis, and some even tried to discourage them from coming. But the northern rabbis simply assumed the community needed their help and went to Birmingham anyway. They were met at the airport by members of the Jewish community, including Rabbi Grafman, and were urged to leave. And they refused to leave. Birmingham Jews wondered how these Northerners could possibly understand what life was like for them in Birmingham. Many feared the rabbis would do more harm than good. What could be the unintended consequences of their being there? Would the presence of the northern rabbis threaten the Jews' personal and economic security in Birmingham even more than it already was? Would it solidify the belief by the segregationists that integration was a plot cooked up by the, quote, Jewish communists, end quote? In the end, the northern rabbis attended a mass rally at the 16th Street Baptist Church and met with Dr. King. They were heartily welcomed by the Black community, if not so much by the Jewish community. Any comments about this particular campaign? This one's very interesting to me.
I never heard about this before, and it still amazes me. I mean, the North and the South can't not agreeing on things.
Yeah,
You know, the Jews are, they're in a very, the Southern Jews are in a very difficult position
absolutely.
because, you know, they knew that if the Ku Klux Klan or any of the other groups killed them, that would be okay with the local police.
Absolutely. Yeah, as I was studying this, it was just really difficult because it was hard because they were really stuck, and yet, they probably wanted to do something, but with life the way it was there in that city, um, it probably wasn't a good idea. And they were working behind the scenes, as I mentioned, with the local uh, police and the local government to try to get things changed gradually. Um, so they were probably doing what they thought was safest for them, which is smart, um, and trying to just get something done in a way that they could. And any comments about maybe the unintended consequences of the northern rabbis coming down there uninvited?
Yeah, I have a comment on yeah with this issue of North and South, a civil war, and up to now, there's always the question: if people from outside the South are coming there, is it carpetbagging? I mean, do they have a legitimate right to protest? But the other hand is, like Mark was saying, people living in the South were in a difficult position.
Yes,
So people that felt strongly, yeah, I mean, there's good arguments on both sides.
exactly.
But the Northerners can be considered carpetbaggers. So
Right. Right. It's just, don't you think, maybe a matter of just really not understanding the culture's
yeah,
differences? Yeah,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I've never haven't spent much time in the South, but a lot of Northerners think of Southerners as backwards, which probably isn't true. But yeah, understanding the cultures is always is important. Yeah.
okay. We could have the outline back up, Mark, of number one, please. Okay, so 1963, we'll leave Birmingham and let them settle things for themselves down there, and go to Washington with the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, 1963. The March on Washington was a critical turning point for the civil rights movement. Gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial and spreading down the mall to the Washington Monument were 250,000 people wanting to show the nation that change was needed now. 75 to 80% of the participants were Black, and the Jewish presence was definitely notable. If we could have photo number 8, please, Mark, of Rabbi Prince. Okay. Rabbi Joachim Prince was driven from Germany in 1937 for speaking out against Nazism. He came to the US and settled in Newark, New Jersey, where he accepted the job of rabbi at a local temple. He was committed to the civil rights movement, seeing the Black struggle for equality and justice similar to the struggles Jews had faced in Nazi Germany. In 1958, he assumed leadership of the American Jewish Congress, which was heavily involved in the civil rights movement, and he befriended Martin Luther King. Rabbi Prince helped organize the 1963 March on Washington. Just prior to Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech, Rabbi Prince delivered his own impassioned speech before the crowd. He cried out against silence in the face of injustice. And following is a piece of his speech, my quote: "As Jews, we bring to this great demonstration, in which thousands of us proudly participate, a twofold experience, one of the spirit and one of our history. In the realm of the spirit, our fathers taught us thousands of years ago that when God created man, he created him as everybody's neighbor. Neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral concept. It means our collective responsibility for the preservation of man's dignity and integrity. From our Jewish historic experience of 3,500 years, we say, our ancient history began with slavery and the yearning for freedom. During the Middle Ages, my people lived for 1,000 years in the ghettos of Europe. Our modern history begins with a proclamation of emancipation. It is for these reasons that it is not merely sympathy and compassion for the Black people of America that motivates us. It is above all and beyond all such sympathies and emotions a sense of complete identification and solidarity born of our own painful historic experience. End quote. Hey, Mark, if we could have the outline of one back up again. "1964 is Freedom Summer in Mississippi. Blacks in Mississippi faced nearly insurmountable obstacles in voter registration. It's estimated that only 7% of eligible Blacks were registered to vote in the state in the 1960s. They were threatened with job loss if they tried to register. They had to pass arbitrary literary tests that included arcane questions about the Mississippi State Constitution. They had to pay poll taxes, and for merely showing up to register, they faced verbal abuse, intimidation, and physical violence. Vicious actions by the KKK were overlooked by government officials and police, who often used the same tactics as the KKK did. Freedom Summer was organized by an umbrella group in Mississippi called the Council of Federated Organizations, or COFO, whose stated purpose was to get Blacks in Mississippi registered to vote. Additionally, Freedom Summer was dedicated to creating Freedom Schools, where volunteers supplemented Blacks' meager public school educations with classes in reading, writing, history, and civics. Hundreds of volunteers, mostly white college students, and fully half of them Jewish, made Freedom Summer their projects. To prepare for the dangerous work ahead, the volunteers attended 2 weeks of training in Oxford, Ohio in 1964. They were taught nonviolent self-defense tactics, how to register Blacks to vote, and what and how to teach at the Freedom Schools. The Mississippi KKK's response was immediate and devastating. The KKK there had nearly 10,000 members at hand to fight Freedom Summer. They targeted the activists as well as the Black communities. Blacks' houses and over 30 Black churches were bombed during the summer, and Freedom Summer volunteers were physically assaulted. 3 volunteers, James Chaney, a Black man from Meridian, Mississippi, and 2 Jewish men, Michael Schwerner from New York and Andrew Goodman from New York, met at Oxford, Ohio Training Center. All 3 men were in their early 20s. James Chaney and Michael Schwerner had been involved in the movement for some time and were now training the new volunteers at the Ohio facility when Andrew Goodman arrived to start his training. Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman then traveled to Mississippi to begin their Freedom Summer work. If we could have photo 9, please, Mark. This is a map of Mississippi showing Neshoba County, where most of what I'm going to be talking about next took place. In June 1964, the Ku Klux Klan burned down Mount Zion Methodist Church in Neshoba County near Philadelphia, Mississippi. It was targeted because it was being used for Freedom Summer activities. Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman drove there to investigate what had happened. Afterward, when they were driving back to their home base, they were stopped by police who recognized their station wagon. They were charged with speeding, were jailed, and then released. But it was a setup. Upon release, excuse me, they were followed, stopped, and abducted by the KKK. The Klansmen burned their car and hid it in a remote area, and then they shot the three to death. Photo number 10, please, Mark. These are the three: Andrew Goodman on the left, James Chaney in the middle, and Michael Schwerner on the right. The disappearance of these three men raised national alarm, and the FBI launched a massive manhunt. Photo 11, please. The FBI eventually found their burnt-out vehicle in the Bogue Cheeto Swamp in Neshoba County. There's a little arrow there pointing with an X to show how deep within the swamp area they had hidden that car. And photo number 12, please, Mark. Thanks to an informant's tip, the FBI found the men's body buried 14 feet deep in an earthen dam. The shocking deaths of Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman helped pave the way. Excuse me a second. Sorry. The shocking deaths of Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman helped pave the way for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The act, passed 1 month after their deaths, prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in voting rights, access to public places, and employment in schools. Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman were posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama in 2014. If we could have photo number 13, please, Mark. So our last campaign we'll talk about is the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965. This photo is a photo I took from the top of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. So I want just for a second to imagine that you're going to be doing this march to the city of Montgomery, which is 55 miles away, and you're looking down to the bottom of the bridge. At the bottom of the bridge, about where those cars are, you would have seen mounted policemen, policemen on foot, so-called posse men waiting in a gang, and on the either side of the highway were spectators waiting to watch what would happen. It appeared that the state of Alabama did not believe the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was passed soon after the deaths of Freedom Summer volunteers Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman, applied there. Blacks were still confronted by myriad hurdles when attempting to register to vote. Poll taxes, literacy taxes, and intimidation were the norm. There were Alabama counties in which no Blacks at all were registered to vote. The civil rights organizations were determined to bring this gross injustice and defiance of federal law to the nation's attention. The 55-mile Selma to Montgomery March of 1965 was the way they chose to accomplish this. Martin Luther King would lead, and John Lewis was with him. The first attempt was on Sunday, March 7th, and it ended horribly as the 600 marchers leaving Selma and walking down this bridge that you see in front of you were met by police on foot, mounted police and posse men, who assailed them with clubs, whips, cattle prods, and tear gas when they refused to disperse. Whites who had gathered to view the spectacle cheered the police on. 58 people were injured and 17 were hospitalized. John Lewis suffered a fractured skull, and that terrible day became known as Bloody Sunday. The second attempt, led by Martin Luther King on March 9, resulted in the group turning around when, again, the state troopers blocked the foot of the bridge. But on the March 23rd, 21st, the third and final attempt began, and this time about 3,200 people set out for Montgomery. Fortunately, a judge had ruled that this march could take place because the First Amendment permits protesters to do so. The state of Alabama could not interfere, and therefore the police didn't try to stop them this time. The crowd walked an average of 12 miles a day and slept in fields at night along the way. They gathered more marchers along the way, and by the time they reached the capital of Montgomery, March 25th, they were 25,000 strong. We could have photo 14, please, of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel of New York City became an invaluable supporter of the civil rights movement. Born in Poland, his experiences under the Nazis informed his passion for social justice. He lost his mother and sister to the Holocaust, but he was able to escape Nazi Germany and move to the US in 1940. In 1963, he met and befriended Martin Luther King at a conference for Christians and Jews. Both men believed that it was a religious person's duty to work for justice in this world. After Bloody Sunday in Selma, Rabbi Herschel and 800 activists marched to FBI headquarters in New York City to protest the horrific treatment the marchers had received in Selma. Soon after, Martin Luther King invited Rabbi Heschel to join him up front in the final march from Selma to Montgomery. Following is a quote from Rabbi Heschel's daughter, Susanna, about what he had written after Selma. Quote, "For many of us, the march from Selma to Montgomery was about protest and prayer. Legs are not lips, and walking is not kneeling. And yet, our legs uttered songs. Even without words, our march was worship. I felt my legs were praying." End quote. As a result of the march, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It outlawed literacy tests and ensured that the federal government would protect Blacks' rights to vote as defined by the 15th Amendment of the Constitution. Thank you, Mark. You can take the photos down. Gallery view here.
Fabulous.
Just
Presentation.
Thank you. Just as a conclusion here, I've got that the costs were really high for the Jewish people. Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman lost their lives. Anti-Semitic activities increased. Synagogues and Jewish community centers were bombed. Some rabbis were forced out of their congregations because of their activism, and Jewish businesses suffered. And many congregations and communities, especially in the South, became divided. So were these sacrifices worth it? Well, the Montgomery boycott, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on buses was unconstitutional. In Little Rock, the Little Rock Central High was integrated, and the federal government could now enforce federal laws that individual states were ignoring, with federal troops if necessary. Freedom rides. The federal government endorsed desegregation in interstate travel facilities. Birmingham. City of Birmingham's lunchrooms, restrooms, fitting rooms were desegregated, and the city also decided to change hiring practices for Blacks. After Birmingham, President Kennedy proposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was signed into law by President Johnson. Discrimination by race, color, sex, national origin, or religion became illegal. Freedom Summer. Volunteers brought national attention to all the roadblocks that Blacks faced when trying to register to vote in the South. Freedom Summer also initiated a call for the Voting Rights Act to enable more Blacks to participate in their own government representatives. Selma. There's a direct connection between the Selma to Montgomery March and the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, signed by President Johnson. Poll taxes and literacy tests became illegal. The act also permitted the federal government to oversee elections to ensure that the laws put forth by the acts were being followed. In other words, as a result of the campaigns we discussed tonight, pretty much Jim Crow was effectively dismantled. So I think Jews can be extremely proud of these accomplishments and their dedication to the pursuit of social justice and tikkun olam, as shown by their participation in the civil rights movement. Thank you. Thank you. Any comments, final thoughts?
Yeah, well, I would say it was worth it, but in any type of grassroots movement that makes change, it always takes a handful of very brave people to do these things. So, like people like Rabbi Abraham Heschel and the others you mentioned, and another cost that can be considered how many Jewish people contributed money to these causes too.
Right.
I guess most people heard that Jesse Jackson passed away
Yes,
this week.
yes,
And so he was very active in all these things.
yes,
He was
yeah,
young man at the time when he worked with Martin Luther King. But he said some pretty nasty things about Jews. He called New York Town.
Yeah.
And he apologized profusely, I believe, somewhat. He apologized for it. So it wasn't like the relationship between the blacks and the Jews were always hunky dory either.
true.
So
Right. But Martin Luther King was a true friend of the Jews, no doubt about that. And he spoke out against blacks that had anti-Jewish bias and anti-Israeli bias. Martin Luther King said there's no place for that. And we don't have, you know, anybody of his stature nowadays in the black community who is so strongly supporting the Jews. There are some leaders, but not. I mean,
Well, you
how many
mean that
more? How many
Al
MLKs
Sharpton?
are there? Well,
Yeah,
Sharpton has really made a
He's
lot of
mellowed.
changes.
He's
He
mellowed.
really yeah
you mean personally?
he's actually made some big changes
yeah,
because
yeah,
he's somebody that we followed for many years. My brother-in-law
He went
went
to the
to
same
high
high
school
school.
with.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
He went to Tilden in Brooklyn. He was in the same year Donald
yeah,
was in, and he was he was an activist back then too.
sure.
He he started young, but yeah, he's kind of
But
cleaned up his act in
he
many
has, and
ways.
he's been good for the Jews the last few years, in my opinion.
yeah. The problem with the Martin Luther King figure, he was definitely a great figure, but someone like that doesn't come along
I
like
know,
maybe
I
once
know.
every 50, 100
mhm.
years.
Right.
But
Well, even within the black community, there were differences about how to handle that. I mean, the whole,
yeah, yeah,
Nation of
Violent
Islam,
versus
right, and
nonviolence.
yeah,
Yeah.
do it
yeah.
fast, do it slow, and so it wasn't like all the blacks were in agreement about what to do either. So it was a difficult time. I think those people who came from out of state, and people lived there too. They were very brave. They
Yeah,
were
Yeah,
yeah,
brave.
yeah,
The whole idea of civil disobedience was they were very brave.
The people were more committed and more optimistic in the 60s.
Sure.
yeah, yeah. And also, um, not too long ago, but seems a distant time ago, people were willing to respect institutional figures.
Mm.
Nowadays, with the internet, anyone can get on and say what they want. And there's an advantage to that. But if you don't have respect for institutional figures, it's hard to find leaders.
Mm. And Colette, I wanted to mention if you want to do any more research on the Pettus Bridge, um, last year or the year before, Rabbi Beth Kalish from Beth David took part in an anniversary march over the bridge,
Ooh,
and I'm sure she has a wealth of information.
where is she from?
Beth David
Beth David. Okay, let me write
in
that down.
Gladwin.
Yeah, your picture of the bridge was beautiful. I mean, it
Oh,
really,
Yeah,
thanks.
really gave you a feeling of it. I was very
yeah,
impressed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she
yeah,
got those cars down
Yeah,
there. That
yeah,
was great.
yeah,
they're
yeah,
waiting.
yeah,
Yeah, it's not a very high bridge, so you
yeah,
just walk up quickly, but it's the sensation of walking up that hill that it goes up and then stopping there and looking down. It was very powerful.
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Very, very
Yeah.
powerful.
And wasn't there a proposal to rename it the John Lewis Bridge or something like that?
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, yeah, I heard something about, well, something was named after John Lewis.
Yeah, he got the crap beat out of him.
Oh,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't he the one who always talked about good trouble? Make
Yes.
yes.
good trouble.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way you've put things together, Colette, in terms of these kinds of protests were very instrumental in getting these kinds of laws passed.
Right.
And, be interesting 5 or 10 years from now to look back and see whether those laws have survived.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
they are under attack, that's for
They
sure.
are very much under attack. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of, was that 64, 65?
Yeah.
The,
Voting rights acts.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I mean,
60.
that's already been halfway dismantled by the Supreme Court, and there's another case pending to try to get rid of more of it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that
Well,
may
well,
turn into nothing.
yeah, it remains to see how much does survive, but
Yeah.
some things I don't think going to change. Like I don't think there's going to be like segregated buses anymore, no matter if there's a law or not. It's hard to imagine that. But if the Voting Rights Act is taken out, yeah, that's under debate today about access to voting, and yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised under the current administration if there's a slight movement toward de facto segregation with the buses and transportation and buildings and so on.
Yeah, you just don't know what's going to be. I mean, every year is full of surprises and you don't know. And
Has
you know,
anybody,
go ahead, go ahead.
has anybody watched, I've taped it because we were away, Jewish and Black Americans on
yeah,
people?
We've watched the first episode and then we've recorded the others because we started watching Olympics. But
Yeah, me too.
the first episode was fabulous, so I have high hopes for the rest of the series.
yeah, I did watch it. I mean, it is a very good series. The host on Henry Louis Gates, he's I think at Harvard, he's very well informed about a lot of issues, and he's written about these issues. So anyone who hasn't seen it, I think you'll find a lot to learn in that.
On PBS, right?
That's
Yeah.
Yeah,
PBS.
yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. There was like 3 or 4 parts. Look, last night they showed 2 hours, but like that was part 3 and part 4. So I don't. Yeah, it's a very knowledgeable.
Well,
So
go ahead.
I was going to ask Colette if she wanted to mention about the third part, which won't be.
Oh, the third one in May.
Yes.
So in May, we're going to have a third and last talk, excuse me, and that's going to be about Jews in the Gilded Age.
Hmm.
So we'll go to another time period. So I'm looking forward to research on that one.
Fabulous.
That sounds interesting.
There are just so many websites out there that just so helpful. So we're
Yeah,
grateful for that. And of course, there are lots and lots and lots of books on civil rights movement, but
yeah,
websites are fantastic.
yeah.
Did I stop the recording?
Yeah.
I'm going to stop the recording,
Okay.
and
Okay.
people who want to chat a little more can stay on.
Yeah.